alternative to Obamacare. Well, and you got Republicans that run around trying to think, well, we need to come up with an alternative. No, you don't. That's the whole point. You don't let the bad opportunists who are totally external run the debate and set the agenda. You don't fall into their trap. You say, hold on, time out. Boom. No. The best idea we have is no idea. Getting the government out of it, allowing the individual to be able to handle their own health care themselves, between them and their doctor, nobody else in between. Period. That should be the idea. Look, we don't have medical externists, do we? No, we have medical internists. Why? Because everything happens on the inside. Seriously. I mean, even if you get skin cancer, it's going to affect your what? Your internal organs. Everything happens on the inside. That's why we don't have medical externists. We have medical internists. I mean, come on, let's face it, folks. The whole being of human nature. Look, animals. The left is so enamored with wild creatures. Well, do you think a wild creature ever sits around and says, "Okay, if we get together here, I want, I want the rest of the bear community to provide me with my sustenance. I want the bear community to be able to find me and provide me with a cave or some area that I can hibernate safely." No, each individual bear has to find their own way. They have to survive on their own. Because that's the way the entire universe is designed. And whenever there's an external force that comes to interact, if you look in the universe, it's always devastating. Hey, if an asteroid or meteor or whatever enters Earth's atmosphere and hits Earth's atmosphere, what happens? It's an external thing, and it comes attacking the Earth. It's not a good thing. There's devastation that's going to follow. But when the Earth is left alone to be itself and to contain everything and provide all the resources that are necessary for life on the planet, what happens? Life flourishes. But you bring in that external element, whatever it is, whether it be an asteroid or a meteor or a comet or anything else that comes in or close to the Earth, there is definite, absolute destruction. It's never a good thing. So why are we looking to the external when the universe understands internal is harmony and balance, external is chaos and destruction? Plain and simple. I don't know how else to say it, folks, but it is what it is. It is what it is. And speaking of internal versus external, we gotta, folks. If we look at the Middle East, Middle East is a prime example of internal versus external. We were the external force that disrupted Iraq. We went into Iraq. We're the external force, and we devastated them internally. And then, without rebuilding them internally strong, this president left them, unable to really keep their internal systems in place. And now we have a near total defeat of Iraq. The next president of the United States has got to go into Iraq. I'm sorry. We have got to go in, be the external force again, in order to fix the mess that we created by leaving before we strengthen their internal force. Because there's right now, Ramadi has fallen to ISIS. In fact, it was a terrible disaster and defeat for the Iraqi forces. Total collapse of the elite Iraqi units are routed in Ramadi offensive by ISIS, and that puts ISIS 60 miles outside of Baghdad. Do you realize what this means? It means that even Syria has not yet fallen to ISIS, but Iraq, the country that, we're the ones that were supposed to have created this new modern Iraq, is about to fall. They're about to fall. And this is due to the fact that we have a man-child as president who doesn't know how or doesn't want to stand up to these radical extremists. And you think, externalist. Externalist, Rod? Yeah, ISIS is external to Iraq. All wars are that way too. You've got this external army or government that wants to take over a particular country. So they go into the country. And what happens after that? After destruction and devastation and death. The 3 Ds. Destruction, devastation, and death. And that's what's going on in Iraq right now. Destruction, devastation, and death. And it is due to our external issues. Because we weren't thinking about the people of Iraq. We need to get out of Iraq, man. Kind of like Vietnam. Get out of Iraq. This president said he was going to get us out of Iraq. Get us out of Iraq. Because we were thinking externally. In a selfish sort of way. Because we wanted the world to love us. And if we only capitulated to what those external forces wanted, they would all love us and everybody live in peace and harmony. Well, evidently, somebody didn't give ISIS a Coke. Because they're not living in peace and harmony over there. I mean, look. No, well, here's a story from Hot Air. When ISIS began its attack on Ramadi last week, the Iraqi government threw in its elite units hoping to stem the tide of the radical Sunni advance and the overall targeting of Baghdad. Instead of pushing ISIS back, what transpired was a repeat of the fight from Mosul in other former Iraqi strongholds. A disorganized rout of Iraqi forces. So, if your so-called elite can't stand up to a bunch of ragtags who were not formally trained, I mean, let's face it, ISIS is not a nation, and these soldiers of ISIS are not all formally trained. And it doesn't mean that an informal force can't beat a formally trained force. Look, it's how this country got started. George Washington and the Revolutionary Army, most of them were not formally trained soldiers, but and they lost most of their battles. But when it came right down to it, they put a hurting on the formally trained British Army and Navy and won the war. Sure, there was a little bit of help from France, especially when it really counted. But you know what? Everything else in between was all about those men in the Revolutionary Army. It was about George Washington. There's a program on AMC called Turn. Now, I haven't watched a single episode of it yet. And maybe it'll be my new Mad Men. Now that Mad Men is over, I'm going to have to try to binge watch. If it catches my attention, I'll binge watch Turn. Now, I don't know how accurate it is, historically speaking. But the premise, I see the previews. George Washington's in trouble. George Washington is this. It's never any good. And from what I know of American history, a lot of, George Washington was very good at retreating. And mostly because he had a bunch of ragtag men that were ill-equipped and ill-prepared to really handle, face-to-face, the formerly trained British Army. At the particular time, the most powerful military on the planet. It seemed like wherever the British went, they would win. So sometimes it behooved Mr. Washington to fully understand when it was time to retreat and fight another day. But he didn't look to the external and complain and whine. He's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I don't have all these guys. Somebody's going to come in and help. No. Sure, there were times that they sent emissaries and tried to enlist France to help them because, after all, France and England and Britain at the time were enemies, sworn enemies. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend, type of thing. And hey, let's face it, it's a good thing that France did that because we ended up returning the favor twice for them in history. Although I think they've forgotten it. Yeah, France owes us one, actually. We saved them in World War I, and we saved them again in World War II. So we paid them back for the Revolutionary War help that they were reluctant to give us in the Revolutionary War. We paid them back in World War I by giving them back their country and their freedom. And then we got one up. If you're going to keep score, we're one up on them. For World War II, but I have no doubt that even if France didn't help that particular day that actually ended the war in the favor of the United States, or the revolution in Washington, that Washington would have found a way to retreat, fight another day, and find victory. Because it was all coming from within. It was all coming from their own personal beliefs. Every single one of those men. Even if they were not formally trained in the army, it was all coming from within. They were saying, we've got to find a way within us to do this. They were not depending on France, and we could see in many different programs and historical documents and things like that they were not depending on France. Yes, they were thankful and they could use France's help. France helped at the most opportune times, but they were trying to make it without France's help. This was all internal. Do you understand? This was not external stuff. External is always devastating in one fashion or another. And we're seeing that with our own people when we start looking for government, which is external to each individual, to solve our problems, to handle our problems, to give us opportunity. Government can't do that. That has to come from within. It's a hard lesson that we're learning. And I hope to God that we learn it in time. Because if we don't, it's going to take something very strong, like probably another Revolutionary War, to get us all to think internally again and to get rid of an overbearing external government. Don't doubt me, folks. Don't doubt me.